Around 24 rallies were planned across the U.S. on Saturday to condemn Sharia law. The law is the Islamic legal and moral code that organizers say is a threat to American freedoms. On its website, ACT described Sharia as incompatible with human rights. However, critics believe this is a cover-up for anti-Muslim hatred. Self-described grassroots organizations ACT for America has scheduled protests in New York, Chicago, Boston, Denver, and Seattle. Hundreds of people are expected to attend.
We try to stand together in any way we can.
These three leaders of faith spent Friday passing out flyers like these near where tomorrow's planned anti-Sharia law demonstration is expected to draw dozens. They worry the organizers of Seattle's March Against Sharia are fanning the flames of intolerance.
That's saying that faithful Muslims aren't good participants within any kind of civilized society. So we're hearing some of those messages, and obviously those are very concerning.
Is your march anti-Muslim?
No, it's not. It's anti-Sharia. There's a difference. You can separate Sharia from Muslim.
Anthony Parrish organized the anti-Sharia protest here. He says his group is trying to educate people on what he describes as a culture incompatible with America's values.
Let's try to keep this peaceful. That's what I'm promoting out here. We're just out there to get a message across.
Protests got heated in Portland recently, and after one man allegedly stabbed two people to death on a train, Parrish insists his demonstration in Seattle won't turn violent.
Some of the people that are protesting us are just going to try to shout us down, and they're not willing to listen. But this is America, and everyone's welcome.
Brian, so far, any clashes?
Hi, Leland. Yeah, there have been some clashes. Police around the country have fear that there would be because of the dueling protest action that's happening in 28 cities in 19 states. On one side, you have the anti-Sharia law people. These are people that believe that Sharia law and Islamic law is a threat to the Constitution. On the other side, you have those who believe that this movement is anti-Muslim. They are anti-Trump, anti-fascist, and they believe that this is all a racist thing. So you have two different sides. The police did everything they could to split them up across the street. They've been crossing the street, and now you've got a mix of both protests. So there have been some pushing, there's been some shoving, and you have extreme elements essentially of both sides. It really is pretty apropos and an example of the politics of our country right now. You see the NYPD doing a good job of making sure that one protest stays there while the other anti-Sharia law protest stays here. And the big crux of where the disconnect is that one side believes that the anti-Sharia law side means that they're all anti-Muslim. And here they believe, we spoke to protesters who came out here in support of Trump, who are conservatives, who say this is not about being anti-Muslim. Take a listen.
This is a pro-American, that we need to do this for ourselves, for each other. We really do. We have to look out for each other.
I'm for Islam. I don't discriminate against anything or the religions or race or anything. It's just the extremism part of it that sort of makes everything so bad.
So these grassroots marches that are happening today, the marches against Sharia law, organized by ACT for America. It's a large national security organization is how they characterize themselves. But the other side of this, the anti-fascists and those that are against this movement, say that the ACT for America group is actually anti-Islamic, and they believe that it is a veil, essentially, for people to just be racist and against Muslims. Take a listen to one of the supporters of the other side that we spoke to today.
They're not for our rights. They're not for our freedom. They're for the freedom of just a very small percentage of this country.
So again, Leland, we'll be watching the protests throughout the entire day here. 28 cities and 19 states, dueling clashes expected throughout the day. Considering what we saw in Portland, Oregon on Sunday, all eyes are on these protests. NYPD doing a good job of keeping everybody in check so far.
Sao Paulo is the industrial and financial capital of South America and attracts migrants from all over the world. Most of the city's mosques are in the Brás neighborhood, near the city center. Muslims first arrived in Brazil from Africa during the transatlantic slave trade. A second wave of Lebanese and Syrian migrants came after. Today, less than 1% of Brazil's more than 200 million people are practicing Muslims, but the number is growing. Since the beginning of the war in Syria, Brazil has issued thousands of humanitarian visas to Syrians fleeing the war. Brazil's Muslim population has increased in recent years, with the arrival of thousands of migrants from Syria, the Middle East and Africa. And with most of them settling in Sao Paulo, this year's Ramadan celebrations will be one of the most celebrated in the city's history.
It's Pride Month, so get out your rainbow flag. Pride Month is not just about celebrating, though. It's also about raising awareness for issues that affect different members of the LGBTQ+ community, which seems more important than ever. And while we're used to seeing the rainbow flag as a symbol of the LGBTQ+ movement, Philadelphia has added 2 new colors to their flag for a wonderful reason. More Color, More Pride is the organization behind the addition of the colors black and brown to the flag. The reason they've added those 2 colors in particular is to honor queer people of color.
At least 2 American soldiers were killed and 2 others wounded on Saturday after an Afghan commando opened fire on them in eastern Afghanistan. The shooting occurred in Achin district, where the United States Special Forces have been fighting with Afghan troops against Islamic State and Taliban militants. A spokesman for the U.S. military command in Kabul claimed they were aware of the report but could not yet confirm any details. A Taliban spokesman says the shooter was a member of the militant group and killed 4 Americans and wounded several more.
The U.S. is helping the Filipino military fight ISIS-linked terror groups on the country's large southern island. An American surveillance plane was seen flying over Marawi City, the center of the fighting. A spokesman for the Filipino army said the U.S. was only providing technical support. Islamist militants took over Marawi City on May 23rd, leading President Rodrigo Duterte to declare martial law for the entire island. So far, 58 Filipino troops have been killed in the fighting. 13 were killed in a day-long firefight with militants on Friday. A military official said the goal was to evict the Islamists and retake the city by Monday, the country's Independence Day.
Yes, absolutely, I'd be committed to Article 5.
At a press conference Friday, President Donald Trump finally committed the U.S. to NATO's Mutual Defense Agreement, better known as Article 5. That commitment wasn't in Trump's speech to other world leaders at NATO's headquarters in Brussels last month, even though it was in a draft of the speech. Trump also repeatedly called the alliance obsolete during his campaign, but he later seemed to reverse that position. He's continued to scold NATO members for not contributing enough money to defense. Trump will be taking a second foreign trip soon, this time to Poland and then Germany for a G20 summit in Hamburg. The White House says the goal of the trip is to, quote, emphasize the administration's priority of strengthening NATO's collective defense. It appears Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and President Donald Trump have different views on how to deal with the situation in Qatar. At least 7 countries have cut diplomatic ties with Qatar over its alleged support of terrorism. That includes Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, Yemen, Libya, and the Maldives. On Friday, Tillerson called on Saudi Arabia, which is leading the blockade, to ease off. He also encouraged the other countries involved to mend the rift, citing reported humanitarian hardship in Qatar. But in a press conference shortly after, Trump took a noticeably harsher tone. He called Qatar a, quote, funder of terrorism and applauded the Saudi-led effort to cut off resources. An anonymous White House official told the Washington Post that while Trump and Tillerson took different tones, the president isn't against easing the blockade. And both have denounced the funding of terrorism and have asked Qatar to do more to cut ties with radical groups in the region.
A Sandy Hook massacre denier has been sentenced to prison for threatening the father of one of the victims. 57-year-old Lucy Richards pleaded guilty to threatening Leonard Posner in January 2016. According to court records, Richards sent threatening voicemails and emails saying things like, quote, death is coming to you real soon, and look behind you, it is death. Richards contacted Posner after viewing several conspiracy websites that claim the 2012 Sandy Hook school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut never happened. 20 children and 6 educators were killed in that attack, sparking new gun control laws in Connecticut, New York, and Maryland. In the years since, a conspiracy theory has spread online that the Sandy Hook massacre was a hoax concocted to increase calls for new gun regulations. Richards was sentenced on June 7th to 5 months in prison and 5 months of home confinement.
President Trump today declared James Comey's testimony a total and complete vindication.
No collusion, no obstruction. He's a leaker. But we want to get back to running our great country.
But even as the president claimed victory based on some of what Comey said, he accused the fired FBI director of lying in much of the rest of his sworn testimony.
We were very, very happy. And frankly, James Comey confirmed a lot of what I said. And some of the things that he said just weren't true.
One of the most hotly disputed subjects, their Oval Office meeting in February, when Trump cleared the room of his senior advisors to speak one-on-one with Comey.
My impression was something big is about to happen. I need to remember every single word that is spoken.
Comey claims that is when the president said he, quote, hoped Comey would let go of the FBI investigation into fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn.
I took it as a direction. Right. I mean, this is the President of the United States, with me alone, saying, I hope this. I took it as, this is what he wants me to do. Now, I didn't obey that, but that's the way I took it.
You suggested he didn't tell the truth in everything he said. He did say under oath that you told him to let the Flynn, you said you hoped the Flynn investigation you could let, he could
I didn't
let go.
say that.
So he lied about that.
Well, I didn't say that. I mean, I will tell you, I didn't say that.
And did he ask you to pledge his
And there'd
loyalty?
be nothing wrong if I did say it, according to everybody that I've read today, but I did not say that.
Comey also said that over dinner at the White House, the president told him, quote, I need loyalty, and that he replied to the president, you will always get honesty from me. The president responding, that's what I want, honest loyalty. Comey said he paused and then said, you will get that from me. The president said today Comey was lying about that, too.
Would you be willing to speak under oath to give your version of those events?
100%. I didn't say under oath. I hardly know the man. I'm not going to say, I want you to pledge allegiance. Who would do that? Who would ask a man to pledge allegiance under oath? I mean, think of it. I hardly know the man. It doesn't make sense. No, I didn't say that, and I didn't say the other.
So if Robert Mueller wanted to speak with you about that,
I would be glad to tell him exactly what I just told you, John.
And you seem to be hinting that there are recordings of those conversations.
I'm not hinting anything. I'll tell you about it over a very short period of time. Okay? Okay. Do you have a question here?
When will you tell us about the recordings?
Over a fairly short period of time.
Are there tapes, sir?
Oh, you're going to be very disappointed when you hear the answer. Don't worry.
The Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has opened his presidential election campaign office in Perm. He met local volunteers from the campaign and discussed an upcoming nationwide anti-corruption protest on Monday. The opposition leader plans to open 77 affiliated offices around the country to push his bid to become president next year. Are you satisfied with this situation, he asked the crowd. I haven't been satisfied for many, many years, and that's why I'm campaigning. I'm going from one region to another to tell you simply I'm not satisfied with this. For 18 years, everybody has kept silent. Navalny has emerged as a major irritant for the Kremlin after thousands of people across Russia attended anti-graft protests he organized back in March.
June 1987 was a tumultuous month in South Korea's modern history. Protesters had been fighting police across the country, unhappy with the then military-backed government. But it was the death of Lee Han-yeol, a university student, struck on the head by a tear gas canister, that marked a turning point. Such was the outpouring of public anger that the government had little choice but to institute democratic reforms. On the 30th anniversary of Lee's death and the June struggle, as they are known, a series of exhibitions are being held to commemorate the events. People here say they haven't forgotten the struggle for democracy. Not too long ago, South Koreans took to the streets again. The Candlelight Revolution, as it came to be known, was, in contrast, a series of peaceful protests that stretched over several months. It eventually pushed Parliament to vote to impeach President Park Geun-hye, now on trial for corruption. And while many saw the demonstrations as proof of a strong civil society in South Korea, some say it also exposed weaknesses in its political system.
We have to change the political system because Korean system is basically old conservative party, two conservative parties dominate have. While the civil society has become more diverse, but politics fail to represent their interest.
There's now a growing realization that the 1987 Constitution may no longer be suitable.
Although presidents were elected democratically, The way such presidents ruled the country remained as authoritarian as in the past. That led to the impeachment of the former president Park Geun-hye. Awareness has arisen that a new system is necessary to move forward to a more mature democracy.
Among the changes proposed are clauses that would allow for decentralization of power and doing away with single 5-year term limits for presidents. The call for constitutional revision has not gone unheard by politicians. Newly elected President Moon Jae-in has promised to put forward a draft for a new constitution next year.
According to a survey, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's plan to rewrite the constitution is opposed by 85% of the country's citizens. In the poll, the majority of respondents agreed with the statement, there is no need to change the current constitution. What the government should do is enforce it. Maduro has called an election for July 30th to choose lawmakers who will work on the new constitution. He has called it a way to bring back peace after 2 months of anti-government conflict. Opposition parties say they will not participate in the election.
France is trying to convince Americans fighting climate change to make France their new home. French President Emmanuel Macron launched the initiative offering grants to researchers, students, and business people who wish to fight climate change. Macron posted a video on June 1st in response to U.S. President Donald Trump pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. In it, he invites American scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs disappointed with Trump's decision to make France their second homeland. On the initiative's website, makeourplanetgreatagain.fr, researchers can apply for a 4-year grant to carry out their work. The site also promises recipients can stay in France for the duration of the grant or longer if they receive a permanent position. Funding for businesses and non-governmental organizations is also being offered, in addition to information on how to apply for a visa and residency.
The U.S. government's decision to withdraw from the 2015 Paris Agreement has sparked California to take its own initiatives to tackle climate change in the state. Recently, California paired up with Germany and have decided to work together to achieve their goal. On Saturday, Barbara Hendricks, German Minister of Environment, said that the largest economy and the biggest, at least economically, state in America will be working on Under Two coalition. This pact includes cities, regional governments, and states. Hendricks said, "We cannot achieve our climate goals without the engagement of local and regional communities." That has become even clearer after the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement.
On Friday, the United States supported a global call to action at the United Nations to conserve and sustainably use oceans, seas, and marine resources. This even as it is noted President Donald Trump's plan to withdraw from a pact to fight climate change. The first UN Ocean Conference ended on Friday with the adoption of a call to action. It said, "We are particularly alarmed by the adverse impacts of climate change on the ocean." It continued, "We recognize in this regard the particular importance of the Paris Agreement, adopted under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change."
And over to New York, where researchers are planning to release genetically engineered moths that die before they can reproduce. RT's Trinity Chavez has this bizarre story.
Diamondback moths love their vegetables and often chow down on cabbage, cauliflower, but researchers say that these insects are destroying crucifer crops and that something needs to be done. Now, a possible solution to aid this problem could make New York the first state to release genetically modified insects.
It's an invasive pest in North America. In New York, we've had some fields that in some years are pretty much completely destroyed by diamondback moth. And it's a major pest globally. It's estimated to cause $4 to $5 billion worth of injury every year, and we need some other ways of controlling it.
A problem that has become increasingly difficult since the insects can shrug off most pesticide poisons. In the attempt to eradicate their population, Oxidec has developed a genetically modified moth, which Shelton believes could remedy the situation.
The idea behind the genetically engineered diamondback moth is that the males are sterile. And so when they mate with the wild females, then the offspring basically will not survive, and you'll drive down the pest population and consequently drive down the injury or the damage to the plant.
According to the Associated Press, the moths have been tested in a lab and net-covered fields, but now Shelton wants to see how they do in a 10-acre cabbage patch at the university's experimental agriculture site in upstate New York. However, the idea has garnered health concerns, and many say the creation lacks research.
There most likely will be dead larvae
the brassicas, which are cabbages, broccolis, mustard plants. And there's been absolutely no research done on what would be the consumer health impacts. Also, what would be the impacts to the farm worker if they're inhaling these dead larvae? There's been absolutely no research.
Shelton is now waiting for authorization from the Department of Agriculture, but hopes to test the moths this summer.
A new experimental Zika vaccine has given mice 100% protection against a potentially lethal dose of the virus. The virus has spread quickly, and the current main way to avoid contracting it is to evade mosquito bites. The vaccine uses technology formerly used to make experimental vaccines for HIV and the Ebola virus. It was developed by GeoVax. Tests of the vaccine were funded by the CDC and done at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Colorado.